Hi, Will. Good to see you. How are you today?
Good to see you, Russell, and good to be here. I'm very well. Thank
That's
you.
great. Well, I usually start these interviews by asking people where their interest and involvement in ecclesiastical law first began.
Well, mine was via the work of being an ecumenical officer in the Diocese of Oxford and then in the Diocese of Ely. Oxford, it was where it really started. When I was out visiting parishes, helping them to work with their ecumenical neighbours, and realised that there were these things called the canons of the Church of England, which regulated ecumenical behaviour and activity, and there was no turning back. Then my wife, Lindsay Yates, started to contribute to the case notes, and so the whole world of the faculty jurisdiction and consistory courts was opened up to my naive and unknowing eyes, and it was moved on from there to take the LLM in canon law, and then at Cardiff, and then I carried on and did a doctorate also in Cardiff.
Fantastic. That's really interesting. And of course, you're talking to us today in your capacity as editor of the Society's journal, the Ecclesiastical Law Journal. How did you get involved with the journal, and how did you become the editor?
Yes, well, once again, while I was, I think it was just after I finished doing the LLM, I took over from Lindsay, contributing to the case notes, and did the case notes with Justin Gow and Ruth Arlo for a number of years. And then Mark Hill, who was the editor at the time, wanted some help with an assistant editor. And so I took that on, which was very exciting, and that involved more involvement with the whole process of producing the journal, taking the stuff that came in, the copy and the articles, and working with the copy editors and the production people at Cambridge University Press to bring it all to birth. And then in 2013, Mark stood down after a good number of years as editor, and I took over, which I've now been doing for the last 6 or 7 years.
Brilliant. Now, if people see my collection of the printed journal goes back to when I joined the Society, but how long has the journal been produced?
The journal's been going since 1987. There are very few. It's like first editions of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Very few copies of the original issue 1. Mark Hill has one which he keeps and brings out from time to time. But it was a very thin, flimsy, small pamphlet, and they were then, the early issues of the journal were then reprinted a few years later in the slightly larger format than we have now, we were used to for the first few years. So it was 1987 was issue 1, and we're now going into, oh gosh, I ought to know this. I think it's volume 21 or 22, 21, I think. So it's a long time now.
Brilliant. And has the journal it always had pretty much the same sort of focus and content as it has now?
There are some things that have always been. So the consistory court cases and little head notes or case summaries of the consistory court cases have gone right back to the earliest days. There are some topics that go round and round and come up again and again. So questions about the reform of the faculty jurisdiction in the Church of England, interesting topics such as exhumation, etc., do come up from time to time. But over the years, the scope of the journal has widened as the discipline of the academic study of law and religion has itself widened. Mm-hmm. So now we get a lot of international articles, things on comparative law, stuff from the Anglican Communion, material from different religions, many more book reviews, and the case notes still carry on.
Sure. And of course, the Cambridge University Press published the journal now, and that means that it's available online, doesn't it? Not to members of the Society, but also to academic institutions and libraries. They don't necessarily subscribe to a printed copy, but people have access. So there's really international reach, isn't there?
Absolutely, yeah. The Cambridge University Press and other publishers as well do a particular line in what they call journals of learned societies. So there are others around, and we, as the Ecclesiastical Law Society, are one such. And what that means is that we provide all the editing and the content. They do the printing for us, but as you've said, they then put us in with consortia. So there will be a consortium or a list of, say, law journals or social science journals or religion journals, and academic institutions tend to subscribe to a suite of journals for Cambridge. So we have a reach of well over 3,000 institutions and subscribers. And it's very interesting as to which of the articles are most popular. So there's an article on the unwritten constitution of the United Kingdom by Professor Sir John Baker, which is consistently, one of the top performers, because I think some lecturers in Constitutional Law 101 must have it on their reading list.
Right. Yes. Yeah, that's great. So people watching this video, even if they're not members of the society, if they have some institutional membership of libraries or academic institutions, may well be able to get access to the journal and see what we're talking about, even if they've never seen a copy.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're a member of an academic institution, it's likely that you'll have access to Cambridge journals, and you may well have access to the Ecclesiastical Law Journal. But if you're an individual subscriber, by a long way, the easiest and cheapest way of getting access to the journal is by joining the society, rather than by subscribing separately to the journal, which is much more expensive.
Absolutely. Well, we want to encourage that for all sorts of reasons, of course. So as editor, Will, where do you see the main focus of the journal? Where do you see its sort of centre?
Well, the journal is, as we have said, an international comparative journal of law and religion. But it is also a journal which saw its genesis within Anglican and specifically Church of England ecclesiastical law. So there aren't many places in the world where you can read up-to-the-minute scholarly articles on Anglican canon law or Church of England canon law, but ours is one of them. And so I'm very careful to make sure that we keep up the amount of content that we have on Anglican and Church of England issues. So coming up in this little trailer for the next issue, we have an article by Charles George, recently retired Dean of the Arches, on the faculty jurisdiction based on his recent Ecclesiastical Law Society lecture. We've got another article on archdeacons, all these things that are important and are important topics for scholarship, but perhaps won't get airtime in other journals.
Sure, and I think the ELJ fulfills well, pretty much, as you say, a unique role in doing that. But there is, you mentioned, there's that sort of penumbra that's grown over the years as well, which is also really fascinating, of things like law and religion generally across Europe, across the world, balancing religious freedoms and other freedoms, and of course that area of scholarship also has a few other outlets, doesn't it? But it's interesting to see that they're in the ELJ as well from time to time.
Yes, there are other outlets, and we have other brother and sister journals published in this country and elsewhere, which treat a lot of this material. But there's room for all of them, all of us. It's true that over the last few years, questions of religion, religious freedom, and what we might call both freedom for religion and freedom from religion has been litigated quite heavily in courts, particularly in Strasbourg in the European Court of Human Rights. And so there's a lot of what they would call jurisprudence. There's a lot of case law out there to be examined. Likewise, there are religious questions coming up in the States all the time. And it's very good that there are a number of law and religion academic societies out there, both the International Consortium and European Consortium for Law and Religion Studies, which are fertile ground for material for our journal and for other journals.
No, that's that's good, isn't it? It's part of that wider scholarly community. And do you find contributors tend to be approaching you with plenty of ideas for articles, or are you more proactive in seeking out what you want for the journal?
Well, it's a mixture of the two. Sometimes you get an absolute corker of an article that comes in entirely unsolicited. Other times, I'm always on the lookout for things that have been presented at conferences that might work up into scholarly articles. And if people have something that they would like to contribute, that they'd like to see published, please do get in touch. There are, of course, style guidelines, and it's much easier, if I can say this to potential contributors, if you've written your article in the first place with the style guide in mind. That saves everybody time later on. And also to say that one of the sections in the journal you will have seen, readers will see, is the comments section, which comes after the keynote articles. And I've stolen from Grove Books the strapline that it's rarely the last word, but sometimes the first. And the idea of the comments section is for perhaps shorter articles, perhaps more discursive or more speculative things, where people might have an idea about something, might want to comment on something that's in the news, in the Ecclesiastical Law news, which doesn't make it to the front page of the Guardian, or wants to make a point in a way that is earlier on in the discussion. So, just because you haven't had everything completely finished and totally wrapped up doesn't mean you can't submit something to the journal.
Yeah, that's a really interesting part of the journal that really feeds into the living community of ecclesiastical law, which is great, as are things like the book reviews and of course the parliamentary reports.
The parliamentary and government report shows very strongly how there are two sides to the study of canon or ecclesiastical law, which some people use the distinction between canon law and ecclesiastical law to illustrate, which is there's the regulation of religious behaviour by governments, which Frank Cranmer in his Parliament and Government report brings out very strongly. And then there's the internal regulation of religious bodies by themselves. And both are important, and we have articles that treat both in the journal.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, I think that the journal is so central to our work as a society. It's a real central pillar to what we do, and I hope that if there are those who've been listening to this conversation and haven't read it, they find access or beg, buy, or borrow a copy and have a.
Or better still, Russell.
Yes, join the society.
Join the society.
Indeed, and perhaps those who are already members might be inspired instead by this conversation to think of a contribution they might make and get in touch with you through the contact details on the website.
Yes, excellent. And the other thing to say just at the moment is that because of the COVID pandemic, the printing presses have stopped rolling where Cambridge University Press print the journals. So the May issue of the journal still has not been printed. And I don't know when that or the September issue will be printed. So we will be catching up with print copies. But for society members, you can get online access to the May issue of the journal through the society website by using the login that you will have got. And you can get a login, you can prompt getting a new password or whatever it is. He's going to correct me here, readers, by using the email address that society holds for you on the website. Now Russell can tell us what's actually the case.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. If you're not sure what your password is, just use the forget password. You can log in and click through to read not just the current journal, but all the back issues. Search for articles on your favourite topics. It's a really great resource. It works really well when you're doing a bit of research into something. Brilliant. Well, thanks for talking today, Will. It's been great to catch up and hear more about the journal, and see you again soon.
Thank you, Russell. Happy reading, readers.